need to build a positive relationship for everybody using the data. If we create a positive relationship, then everybody is going to be starting to using it to better what they are doing.
Guy from SpeedGuage, and he's talking on this week's show about how you can use data in a positive, effective, influential way with your drivers, your boss, your managers, your insurance company. Join us this week on the Trucking Risk and Insurance Podcast.
Welcome to the Trucking Risk and Insurance Podcast.
Hey, Guy, thanks for joining us. Let's talk about all things telematic today.
Hi, John, and hi, Chris. Thank you very much for having your local Frenchman on board.
Yeah.
And,
well, let's be clear. When you say Frenchman, I mistakenly thought maybe you came from Quebec, but no, you said you didn't come from Quebec. You came from?
I came from Paris. So if, and I always thought that after, over 20 years in the US, I will not have an accent, but clearly this is not the case. I hope listeners and are going to indulge me and I'm going to try to relate to me because it's not that simple. I always think I speak English perfectly, but they're still not perfect.
No. Hey, Guy, I strongly suspect the majority of our listening audience and viewers are also immigrants. So I believe they will be sympathetic and cut us some slack.
Okay, thank you very much.
So, telematics, tell us who you are working with.
So, thank you very much. So, my name is Guy, and I work with SpeedGuage. And SpeedGuage is one of the largest platform or aggregator of telematic data in North America and maybe possibly in the world. I think we cover 92% of all telematic data in North America, and we do work both in Europe and other parts of the world as well. And SpeedGuage is in the phase of transition of going beyond looking at just speeding data and building what we call the driven data network, where we are creating a platform for all the players within the transportation industry to come and exchange data.
So you're building a platform where we can come in and look at the data, but what are you going to be showing us?
And exchange the data, because one of the difficulty is you want people to be transparent in the exchange of the data, and you want to also to be based on permission. I mean, one of the hard part is to make sure that all the people involved in the data usage is authorized to do that the right way. I think that, if we want to have a success in thinking and in using data across our industry, we need to make sure that is as transparent and as easy as possible. And that's what SpeedGuage and the Driven Data Network are building, is a way for the whole people within the industry to come at one location, to have access to data and to use that data in a way that is easy and understandable. So that's what some of the action and the work we are doing within SpeedGuage and within the Driven Data Network.
Well, so when I only have very limited experience with SpeedGuage. I was working temporarily as a safety director for a trucking company, and their telematics, their ELD provider, had SpeedGuage. So I've got some experience with SpeedGuage and the reports. And I loved the report, by the way, because it would tell me how many speeding events. And the thing that I liked about it was it knew the speed limit on all the roads, not just the highway. It knew it on all of the roads. And so I knew when a truck was speeding, which I found very interesting.
So I think so you're making a lot of very good points. So what the SpeedGuage does and what the Driven Data Network foundation is to normalize the data from over 100 telematic providers in North America and around the world. And what does that mean? That means that if you are, if you guys don't mind, I will use names. But if you are using Samsara, or if you are using Trimble, or if you are using Geotab, you are on different platforms. All those different platforms measure and provide data in a very different way. And so what SpeedGuage does is take that data, not just aggregate the data so that you can come to one location to get it, but also normalize it so that, what Samsara's data and what Geotab's data and what Trimble's data looks the same. So you can do comparison of likes for likes. And that's really what the foundation of SpeedGuage started. Now, when we take that to a higher level, is that we realize that it can be applied in many different functions, not just for safety. It can be applied in many other areas of the transportation industry. And so that's why we are evolving as a company from being a focus on safety to be a little bit broader than that. And we are talking about risk management, financial information, and things like that.
I was going to say, give us an example of what do you mean by being able to use it broader?
Yeah. So, for example, our current use case so if you are a company and you work with 100 fleet and you need to access the data from 100 fleet, well, how do you do that? And how do you do that if you have 100 fleet that have 15 different ELDs and telematic providers? That starts to be really interesting. So then what you have certain companies that have, IT department that can ingest data from the top 3 or 4 telematic providers. Well, but you still have 15 others or 12 others to ingest data from. And so that's what SpeedGuage does. But even if you ingest the data, you need to normalize it so that you compare likes for likes. So you could ingest the data from the top 3 telematic providers and then come to another provider to ingest 12 more sources of data. At the same time, they are not normalized. They may not look at all the same. So what SpeedGuage has done and what the Driven Data Network is working on is to take that data and to make it normalized across the industry. One of the biggest applications that we have started to do is to use and offer the data that we have for risk management and the insurance industry. And we think that from what we are getting at is that there's a lot of interest from the risk management and insurance industry to better understand what's happening on the road. And that's what we are able to do because in a normalized way. So they come to the Driven Data Network and they access the data and they can look at it and know that it's very comparable from one fleet to another, even if they have different ELDs or telematic providers.
And a mutual friend of ours, Mr. Workington from Fleet Metrica, he paid for a study, and I'll screw this all up and Ward will yell at me later.
That's okay. That's okay. We will talk to Ward.
But one of the things that, if I can remember the study showing, when negative change starts to happen, such as an increase in speeding for an individual driver, that exponentially greatly increases the risk of a crash for that driver.
Yes. Yeah. And I think SpeedGuage, so let me take you back a little bit back and then come back to your question. SpeedGuage started like 14 years ago as a company to provide enhancement to the telematic industry. So that's how we started. That's why we have developed a lot of connection with the telematic industry. And that's why also we have spent a lot of time working with transportation company and fleet from, local delivery to, class 7 and class 8. So we have a broad range of access to data. And speeding in general, even today, is linked to I think 70% or 60 to 70% is a cause for accidents. So some people will argue it could be lane departure. Some people will argue, you get more insight coming from other sources. But understanding what's happening on the road and how it's linked to speeding and how to change behavior. I think what's more important than just speeding is to understand and recognize change in behavior patterns during the run. And that's what I think Ward, I spoken with him about that. So, and that's the type of information we work on is try to understand what are the changes and surface those changes across maybe different fleet or even within a fleet. Who are the driver and why is there a change in pattern within a driver versus another one? One example that we worked was, I think, based in Canada, and there was a problem with a driver. And, for a long time, she was a perfect driver. And then within a couple of months, there was she started to show that, she was speeding. There was a lot of different issues in her deliveries, in her route. And what happened is that dispatch changed the route without talking to the driver, creating some stress to the driver. Once that was identified, then we facilitated the conversation with dispatch. And within a couple of weeks, that driver that was an excellent driver that has problem became back an excellent driver. So my take is that when we think about data, when we think about the relationship that we have with technology, with the different people within the industry, we need to spend a lot of time making sure we communicate to one another using good data. And SpeedGuage accuracy in terms of data is in the order of 99.5 or 99.7%.
Yeah. Sorry, Johnny, you get your head bobbing.
Well, I'm just going to say one of the things that we need to realize that, and unfortunately I see this too often, is when you get people that are analyzing the data, they're not analyzing it properly, they're not analyzing it thoroughly, and they're very quick to blame the driver. So in these example here, the true root cause of the situation was not the driver.
It was not the driver.
It was an effect upon the driver by a routing change, that management or operations had done. And they didn't realize how this would affect the driver at the time.
Exactly.
So this really helps you to look deeper and find out what's causing that behavioral issue, especially when you go from being really good to, oh my God, things have gone south, and then we can get it back to being good again. It really helps make sure everybody's in communication.
That's right, John. You're making an excellent point. I mean, I just wrote an article that's going to be published later on this month, and I will share with you guys on using data and making it a positive experience. And the concept of it is that, well, we all have access to data. We all are both receiving data and producing data. I mean, when we think about it, everybody produces an enormous amount of data on a daily basis. That is the driver, dispatch, the insurance company, everybody is producing enormous amount of data. And we don't understanding well. And so my supposition is that we need to build a positive relationship for everybody using the data. If we create a positive relationship, then everybody is going to be starting to using it to better what they are doing. And there was a book written by Karen Levy called Data Driven. I was looking at it. I have it here. And it's about the trucking industry. And her proposition is that the trucking industry is using data, and the driver feel that they are being spied by the industry. And so for me, that's a perfect example of negative relationship with the data. When in fact, if we admit that data is part of life and that everybody from the driver, the manager, the fleet owners, the risk consultant, the insurance company, if we all agree that the data is there and there to last, then let's have a positive discussion and let's be able to communicate using some common languages so that we can know what we are talking about when we use data. And that's the presupposition of the article that I'm going to publish is really, we need to use the data, all of us, in a way that is going to provide positive result. And I think we can do that. One of the tools that SpeedGuage has developed in the last 4 or 5 years is what's called the FAIR score. It's a way very simply to understand the risk from the driver all the way through the insurance industry to underwriters or even reinsurers. And so that way we empower everybody to make positive decisions. And, instead of being worried about what's happening, then you have a tool now to manage risk, to understand risk, and to be able to communicate that risk to everybody. Everybody can be empowered. And I think that when you have this type of tool, you start building positive relationship with data. And I think that's fundamental.
Well, I think one of the key things to data is that you share it. If you are transparent and sharing it, in this case, let's talk drivers, because you had mentioned they sometimes have a negative relationship with the data. Then if you share it transparently, it should be accepted in a way that's positive. You've got to present it positively. I think the best risk managers or safety managers now are really delving deep into the data and sharing it with their drivers.
Yeah. I think they should do it.
Go ahead, Gabe.
No, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say it's really key to educate your drivers on the purpose of the data. So yes, being transparent is very key, but educate them on what you're looking at, why you're looking at it, what's going on, and how it can help that driver to be a better driver, right? Yeah. And give them the tools so that they can manage it themselves. It's almost like, I'm not going to manage it for you, but I'm going to provide you with the educational aspect, the coaching opportunity to better understand what's going on with this data. I'll hand you the data. You can see it in a form that you can read to go, oh my gosh, now I see where I need to improve. I can work on those things myself.
I think the other part I will say, that we like it or not, the data exists.
Yes.
Okay. It doesn't matter at all. Okay. That you may not want to use the data. You may want to ignore everything, but in the reality of it, the data exists. So my theory is make it your friend. Make the data your friend. As a driver, leverage it to show your management that you're a good driver, to maybe ask for a few cents more per mile. If you can prove them that you are a good driver, provides that they want to be your friend. I mean, there's always going to be the case where it's not going to happen. However, in general, everybody wants better result, Well,
and I was going to say, there's a phrase I've used many times, and Chris has heard me say this. There's no driver that wants to be a bad driver. They just don't know how to be a good driver.
Yeah.
Well, and imagine, we know how transient drivers are. Could you imagine if the driver was able to take their data with them and show it in a job interview and say, here, here's my data for the last 6 months. Damn, I'm good.
Yeah.
I need top, I need to be paid at the top because here's the data saying that I'm very good at my job.
That's right. And so that brings us back to what is SpeedGuage doing, which is different than the rest, or the driven data network, which is different than the rest of the industry, is that, when you look at the risk management industry and what we call basically the insurance industry, everybody, is worried about increasing premium. And so from what I understand from the industry, there's really rarely a decrease in premium. So it's a question because, and that's for a number of reasons that we can talk about. But the idea is that, can you limit the increase in your premium? Or can you prove that, you are a responsible company days in, days out, and how would you do that? So one of the, I go to risk management conference and, insurance conference on a regular basis because there's always a lot to learn. There's a lot of people to meet that talk about try to solve this problem. And they try to solve this problem understanding that everybody is part of the solution because we need to always, and that's what SpeedGuage has always been focusing on and what the Driven Data Network will always focus on is both the driver and the fleet or the transportation company. We think that, we have to work with them at the core for success. Okay. So then, when I went to, for example, one of my last conference was RIM in Atlanta. And it's a huge risk management conference where professionals from all over the world show up to talk about insurance problems. And one of the big topic of discussion is how to start using operational data rather than using maybe historical or actuarial data. How do we change the way we use data so to provide better insight and better risk management and better pricing? There is that concept also of usage-based insurance. How can you do that? One of the biggest challenge, my take on it is for the transport insurance, commercial transportation or commercial auto industry, is that they don't have access to updated data. And risk management, when we think about it for insurance company, is only done in principle once a year.
Mm-hmm.
Think about it. You all have worked with transportation company and fleets. And everybody in the insurance industry is also very worried about that. The last 90 days before renewal. That's the only thing that people talk about. Okay. It's like everybody is worried and wetting their pants because they're 90 before you know. You broker, an insurance company, you talk to a fleet, to a driver, 90 days before you know. Before those 90 days, nothing exists. Mm-hmm. And after those 90 days, everybody is like, reflecting, I'm going to have another year before I have to think about it again.
Mm-hmm.
So, and what you are realizing, and it's not a very efficient way of doing business, of managing your operations. In fact, there was a company doing that that I don't know if you guys know it. It's called Intuit. And they had a very successful and still have a very successful accounting and software. And it was accounting and software. And, tax is once a year in the United States. It's on April 14th or for that matter, And so like 90 days before, everybody is like freaking out. And so the same thing is, so Intuit was, everything was focusing on the 90 days before tax season to release new product, to do marketing and all that kind of things. And they realized that, that was not working. They did not have the time and the resources to generate enough input from the customer. If the release was not working, it was a disaster for that year sales of their software. And so then they decided to start releasing new product, to start, engaging with customers, not 90 days before tax season, but during the whole year. So then after tax season, they started to work with their clients, and they realized now that they could make improvement to their technology and software and solution for the client on an ongoing basis. Mm-hmm. You can read about that in a book called The Lean Startup from Eric Wright. It's a really astonishing book. It's really fascinating. It talks about ongoing improvement. My take, it's one of the best management books that you can have around. And it talks about you can do a lot of things by doing incremental improvement. You don't have to make major changes. Yes. I don't know if you guys appreciate that, but that's the way from an insurance perspective and risk management perspective. Yeah. It's not about making many changes. It's to understand where you're at and do an ongoing improvement.
Yeah. One of the big problems we see is management wants instant change. They want big improvements, but you can't have it that way. It doesn't work that way. It's like a big ship. You just can't spin it around like a little dinghy, so you've got to make those incremental changes, and you have to continue it during your course of action to make sure that you keep that ship on course. So a lot of times, we're seeing a dip over here. We got to work on these. So we just make that slight change. So, and that's when managing that data on a regular basis, that's where you can see and make those changes as you go along.
Well, it's sorry, I was going to relate this back to my time as a director of safety using SpeedGuage. I had a huge speeding problem. And so my goal wasn't to immediately cut down on the speeding. I set my goal to each month to reduce by a small fraction to hit the top 5 worst drivers and get them to change a little bit. Yeah. Because we all know a massive change is hugely disruptive. But small little tweaks, which can be huge given a whole year, one, as they say, how do you eat an elephant? It's one bite at a time.
At a time. Yeah.
So let me ask you, Chris and Joe, let me ask you this question. What is the cost of insurance for a transportation company?
Too much?
Expensive.
Yes. It's a significant amount of the mile that you're driving. So to make a difference if you manage it or not.
Yeah.
So when, and I'm going to relate to Chris, what you were saying is that it's all about incremental differences. But the first thing is that you need to understand the risk that you are generating. In fact, assuming that you don't have a risk, your job is driving. Your company's job is to bring goods from point A to point B, which is awesome. And in construction or other activities, it has a risk factor. Just trying to believe that there is no risk when you're driving is crazy. Okay, and I don't like to think like that, but we seem that we are in a world where people don't want to acknowledge the fact that there is a basic risk to do what you do. Okay, I mean, I guess looking at data is less risky than driving. So let's acknowledge that. But in everything we do, there's some type of potential risk. Okay. And so then the question is, first, we need to be clear about that. There is a risk. And then from that, what does that mean to engage with that risk? And it's really fundamental to understand that. So, as you pointed out, the SpeedGuage, which is evolving toward becoming really a data platform or the driven data network, because really we intend to connect the whole industry through one location to using standardized data. So that's really important. And for major application, as I have alluded to, is for the insurance industry. Because, as Chris, you mentioned you were a safety director. Well, think about that. Safety is related to insurance, but there's not. We don't think of it as a direct connection. But there is, in fact, a direct connection to risk. Okay, to risk management. And so, SpeedGuage, using the FAIR score, has created what's called the FAIR score to really put a number and to link risk or behavior to insurance risk and to dollar. Create a link between the behavior on the road and the dollar amount that is related to manage risk, which if you just focus on safety, you don't really see that. But when you start moving toward risk management and applying an actual dollar amount, then you can start understanding the correlation between what you do on the road, how you manage risk, to the amount of premium that you will have to pay next year or this coming renewal. So that's what SpeedGuage has created, and has created the FAIR score and trying to make it very simple so that from the driver to the underwriter, they can understand the same number. There's no mysteries. There's no voodoo type of. Well, I don't know if that relate to what you experienced.
Well, what I was going to say is, you said from the carrier to the underwriter, but let's not forget the prosecuting attorney in that thing, because data is data and it's all available.
It's all available, and that's right. So I do believe, I don't like to think in terms of fear. So you mentioned the prosecuting attorney. I think that, as proven by the recent accident in Canada, I believe the use of camera was able to make sure that the driver was not the primary source of liability of problem. So I think that yes, we all have the fear of the attorney, but I think the first thing we need to understand is that we need to be able to understand and measure the risk. So understanding and measuring the risk is, in a very simple way, is that what we have started with, and to do that on an ongoing basis. Because here's the other trick. When I was saying everybody's worrying about the 90 days to renewal, everybody is looking at what? They are looking at historical data or past data or actuarial data. Okay. Now, in a fleet, let's just say a fleet has 30% turnover every year. 100 drivers, 30% turnover every year. Well, what does that mean? Is that the risk at the beginning of the year is very different during the policy period and at the end of the year. So the risk could change during the time period. Nobody is paying attention to that. Okay. So with the FAIR score, with the technology, the normalization that the Driven Data Network and SpeedGuage has come together, well, now you can effectively have insight on the risk during the policy period, which allow both the fleet, brokers, insurance companies to really understand what they can do and how to help one another, so that at the end of the year, when the renewal occur, everybody's on the same page. You don't have to worry for 90 days because you took control of your solution from the get-go. You can empower your driver with it, which is, I think, for me, fundamental, and then you move on from that.
Guy, I think that is a wonderful place to wrap that up, because I think that was the wrap up.
Okay.
Well, no, I'm just saying, you've already hit 30 minutes. I can't believe it.
Well, sorry about that.
Yeah. Well, no, don't be sorry.
It's good. No, it's good. Yeah.
But so what I heard you say there at the end was that you're empowering the driver, the carrier, the insurance provider, and the safety director all together, because they're all using the data. They don't have to worry about insurance renewal at the last 90 days, because really you're managing it 365 days of the year.
Yep, exactly. Right. And we created this, what we call, a common language, one tool, one way of communication. So, it's not my French or John's, whatever English,
gibberish,
but my French, or, we are not, we are using one common language, which is a FAIR score, to understand one another from the driver, at the driver level, at the fleet level, and, and all the way through the chain of understanding and risk management. And it's based on actual operational data.
Yeah. So for our listeners and watchers today who want more information on FAIR score, they should reach out to Guy at SpeedGuage and get more info, right?
Yep, that's right. Cool. And so I'm going to not spell my name and spell my email address, because people, you're going to tune me out.
We'll put a link in the show notes below.
It'll be in easy. Exactly. Guy's information and his email is in the show notes down below. So I encourage you all to reach out to Guy at SpeedGuage to find out more information on FAIR score. That was awesome, Guy. Thanks so much for coming on the Trucking Risk and Insurance podcast. That was awesome, Guy. Thanks so much for coming on the show. For all of you, Guy's contact info is in the show notes down below. If you want to know more about SpeedGuage and FairScore, please reach out to Guy. That's it for this week. Join John and I again next week as we bring you another episode of the Trucking Risk and Insurance Podcast.